The rain came down in relentless sheets, a silver curtain against the glittering abyss of New York City. On the 80th floor of Aura Innovations, the world was silent save for the percussive drumming of water on glass. Inside the cavernous boardroom, Olivia Miller stood before the panoramic window, her reflection a sharp, lonely silhouette against the sprawling metropolis she had conquered. The words of the man sitting behind her hung in the air, heavier than the storm clouds outside. A proposal so audacious, so utterly desperate, it defied all logic. A merger was one thing. A marriage was another entirely. It was a word she had banished from her life, a ghost she refused to acknowledge. She was a fortress, meticulously constructed over years of betrayal and ruthless ambition. Her custom-tailored power suit was her armor, her ice-cold demeanor, her shield. Every strand of her hair was perfectly in place, every reaction calculated, every emotion suppressed under layers of impenetrable control. Olivia had built an empire not just of technology, but of solitude, a kingdom where no one could get close enough to hurt her again. And now this man, Julian Thompson, a rival CEO on the brink of ruin, had walked into her sanctuary and asked not just for a lifeline, but for her life itself, albeit a contractual, temporary version of it. It was a transaction, she told herself, just another deal. Slowly, she turned from the window, her sharp, intelligent eyes finally settling on him. He didn't look like the formidable head of legacy dynamics she had read about in business journals. He looked like a man holding the weight of the world on his shoulders, the stress lines around his kind eyes telling a story of sleepless nights and quiet desperation. There was no corporate swagger, no bravado, only the raw, stripped-down vulnerability of a man pushed to his absolute limit. He wasn't here as a competitor seeking an advantage. He was here as a supplicant, laying his entire world bare on her cold, mahogany boardroom table. "The merger is the only way," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor she could see in his hands. "Marcus Vance will devour my company within the month. After that, he'll have the capital and the momentum to come for you. Our combined assets, our technologies, we would be untouchable. We could crush him, Olivia, together." He used the name of her greatest demon, Marcus Vance, her treacherous ex-fiancé, as bait. He knew the history, of course. The whole world knew. It was a strategic move and a smart one, appealing to the one emotion she allowed herself to feel, the cold, satisfying thirst for victory. Her mind, a whirring supercomputer of risk and reward, processed the business logistics in an instant. The synergy was perfect. The market consolidation would be unprecedented. Defeating Marcus, the man who had used her and left her heart in ashes, was a prize she had craved for a decade. The deal was brilliant from a strategic standpoint, a checkmate in the high-stakes game they were all playing. But the personal terms of his proposal felt like a poison pill attached to the sweetest of victories. A wife. She would have to become a wife again, even in name only. The thought sent a shard of ice through her veins. Then he changed his tone, the practiced CEO vanishing completely, replaced by someone else entirely. "It's not just about the company," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "It's about my niece, Lily. She's 10 years old." He spoke of a rare, life-threatening illness, of an experimental treatment that was her only hope. He explained the hospital's cruel bureaucratic policy for the clinical trial. Eligibility was restricted to children from a stable, two-parent home environment. The word struck Olivia with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about saving a company, it was about saving a child. This was the part her logical mind couldn't compute. The raw, undisguised love that radiated from him as he spoke Lily's name was a force of nature, an emotion so pure and powerful, it felt alien in this sterile, silent room. It was a language she had long forgotten, a warmth she hadn't felt since before Marcus had shattered her faith in human connection. He wasn't acting. This desperation, this fierce, unwavering devotion, it was real. It was the one variable she hadn't accounted for, the one piece of data that didn't fit into her cold, transactional view of the world. A bitter memory surfaced, unbidden. The weight of a wedding dress, the chill of an empty church, the public humiliation orchestrated by Marcus. After that day, she had made a solemn vow to herself. Her heart would be her most guarded asset, never to be leveraged, never to be risked, never to be offered in any deal, personal or professional. She had built her entire life on that single painful principle. To even entertain Julian's proposal would be to betray the very foundation of her existence, to tear down the walls she had so painstakingly built to protect herself from this exact kind of pain. "I'll give you a 70% stake in the new entity," Julian said, his voice pulling her back to the present. He was pushing all his chips to the center of the table, a final, desperate move. "You'll have controlling interest. You'll have final say on everything. My company, my legacy, my pride. It's all yours. All I ask is that you help me save her. Be my wife on paper, Olivia. Please." His gaze was unwavering, a direct plea that bypassed all her corporate defenses and struck something deep within her. He was offering her absolute power in exchange for a shred of compassion. Olivia stared at him, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken pain and impossible choices. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked glass, her vast empty empire feeling more like a gilded cage than ever before. For a decade, her heart had been a locked room, its door sealed shut. Now, a desperate man with kind eyes and an impossible request was standing on the other side, holding a key she never thought she'd see again. He was asking her to sign a contract that would save them both, but she knew with a certainty that terrified her that the price could be far more than just her signature. The silence in the boardroom stretched, becoming a tangible presence, a vacuum filled only by the sound of Olivia's own carefully controlled breathing. Her mind, the architect of her empire, was at war with itself. One part, the cold strategist, saw the undeniable logic. Merging with legacy dynamics would create a titan of the industry, an impenetrable fortress against Marcus Vance. It was the ultimate power move, a way to avenge her past and secure her future in a single brilliant stroke. It was a flawless business decision, but her heart, a dormant, frozen thing, felt a faint, unfamiliar tremor at the memory of Julian's voice when he spoke of his niece. She walked back to the table, her heels clicking with sharp authority on the marble floor, a sound designed to command and intimidate. She would not let him see the crack in her armor. This had to be framed on her terms, within her world of contracts and clauses. "I will accept your proposal, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, as clipped and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "Our lawyers will draft the necessary documents immediately. The merger will be announced at dawn. The marriage ceremony will be private, and a comprehensive prenuptial agreement will be ironclad. This is a business arrangement, nothing more." The wave of relief that washed over Julian's face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. The rigid posture he had maintained throughout the meeting collapsed, and for a moment, he slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands. It was not the reaction of a CEO who had just won a negotiation, but of a man pulled back from the edge of a precipice. When he looked up, his eyes were glistening with unshed tears, and the gratitude in them was a raw, powerful force. "Thank you, Olivia," he whispered, the name sounding intimate and strange in the sterile room. "You won't regret this." She simply gave a curt nod, already turning away, uncomfortable under the weight of his sincerity. The next 48 hours were a blur of legalese and caffeine. Olivia functioned on pure adrenaline, immersing herself in the familiar, comforting world of contractual obligations and corporate restructuring. She was in her element, directing teams of lawyers, analysts, and public relations experts with ruthless efficiency. The world saw the birth of a new tech superpower, a stunning strategic alliance between two former rivals. They did not see the hastily arranged civil ceremony in a judge's chambers, the sterile exchange of rings that felt more like the closing of a deal than the start of a life together. Olivia signed the marriage license with the same detached precision she used for multi-billion-dollar acquisition papers. Her new life began not with a honeymoon, but with a car ride to a Brooklyn brownstone. As she stepped out of her sleek black sedan, the contrast to her own life was jarring. Her penthouse was a monument to minimalism and glass, a sterile sanctuary in the sky. This place was warm and alive. A slightly crooked wreath hung on the oak door, and the scent of damp earth from the window boxes filled the air. This was not a property. It was a home, filled with the ghosts of laughter and the quiet moments of a life lived, a life entirely foreign to her own. The very air felt different, thick with a history she had no part in. Stepping inside, the feeling of being an intruder intensified. The hallway was lined with framed photographs, a smiling couple who must be Julian's parents, a young boy with Julian's eyes, and dozens of a little girl, Lily, at every stage of life. A worn armchair sat in the living room, a soft knitted blanket tossed over its arm. Books overflowed from shelves, stacked on side tables, a testament to a mind that valued stories. It was a comfortable, lived-in chaos that stood in stark opposition to the stark, empty perfection of her own apartment. Every object seemed to whisper a story, creating a narrative of family and love she felt profoundly excluded from. Julian led her into the living room, his movements hesitant, as if he too were navigating this strange new reality. "Lily, there's someone I'd like you to meet," he said softly. Curled on the sofa, surrounded by pillows, was a small, frail girl. Her hair was thin, but her eyes, wide and intelligent, were full of a light that defied her illness. She wasn't drawing or playing, just watching them with a quiet curiosity. She gave a small, shy smile as Olivia approached, a smile so genuine and unguarded it felt like a tiny pinprick to Olivia's heavily shielded heart. This was the reason for it all. This small, fragile child. With a determination that seemed to take all her strength, Lily pushed herself up and walked toward Olivia, clutching a piece of paper in her hand. "I made this for you," she said, her voice a soft whisper. She held out a crayon drawing. It was a child's simple art, yet it depicted a world of profound hope. There was a tall, imposing woman with dark hair, clearly meant to be Olivia, standing next to a kind-eyed man. Between them, holding both their hands, was a small girl with a bright, sunny dress. Above them, a cheerful yellow sun shone down on their stick-figure forms. It was a portrait of a family. For a long, silent moment, Olivia could only stare at the drawing. Her hands, which could sign deals that shifted global markets, felt clumsy and uncertain as she accepted the flimsy piece of paper. A strange, unfamiliar emotion constricted her chest, something tight and painful and dangerously close to a feeling she had buried a decade ago. It was the innocence of the gift, the pure, untainted hope in a child's crayon strokes that completely bypassed the sophisticated defense systems she had spent her adult life perfecting. She felt a crack appear in the icy facade, tiny but undeniable. She forced her lips into what she hoped was a reassuring smile, the expression feeling foreign on her face. "Thank you, Lily. It's beautiful," she managed to say, her voice sounding hoarse and strange to her own ears. The little girl beamed, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy that lit up her pale face. Later that night, alone in a guest room filled with floral wallpaper and the faint scent of lavender, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, the drawing held carefully in her hands. She traced the waxy lines of the crayon family, a silent testament to a life she was now supposed to be living. This was supposed to be a transaction, but that simple drawing felt like an unforeseen clause, a hidden term with the power to change everything. The first few days in the brownstone were a study in quiet awkwardness. Olivia existed on the periphery of Julian and Lily's life, a silent observer behind an invisible wall. She would watch from the doorway as Julian patiently administered Lily's morning medications, his movements a symphony of practiced care. He would talk to the little girl about his day, about silly things he read in the news, his voice a constant, reassuring murmur. Olivia would retreat to the study, the unfamiliar sounds of their domestic life a strange counterpoint to the sharp, decisive tone she used on her business calls. She was an alien in this ecosystem of gentle routines and unwavering devotion. She tried to maintain the fiction that this was simply a remote office. Surrounded by Julian's collection of antique maps and first-edition novels, she would command her global teams, her voice echoing with the cold authority of the boardroom. Yet the illusion was constantly shattered. The scent of chicken soup drifting from the kitchen, the distant sound of Lily's soft laughter at a cartoon, the sight of Julian walking past the door with a fresh blanket for his niece. Each small detail was a reminder of the world she had stepped into, a world that operated on a currency entirely different from her own. Power and control had no meaning here. Only patience and love did. One afternoon, a news alert flashed on her tablet. The headline praised the Ice Queen of Tech for her ruthless and brilliant takeover of legacy dynamics. The article painted her as a master strategist, a corporate predator at the top of her game. She had once relished such descriptions. They were the bricks in the fortress she had built around herself. But now, sitting in the quiet warmth of Julian's study, the words felt like an accusation. They described a one-dimensional caricature, a woman of steel and ice ignoring the strange, unsettling thaw that had begun to happen in her chest since receiving a small crayon-drawn picture of a family. The moment that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening. A fragile peace had settled over the house. Lily was in her room resting, and Julian had stepped into the garden for a crucial, confidential call with the board, finalizing the last contentious details of the merger. Olivia sat in the living room, her laptop open, the glow of financial projections illuminating her face. She was in her comfort zone, a world of numbers and data, actively ignoring the quiet pulse of the house around her. She was Olivia Miller, CEO. She was not a wife. She was not a guardian. This was her role, her safe space. A small, sharp cry pierced the silence. It came from upstairs, from Lily's room. Olivia's entire body went rigid. Her first instinct was to call for Julian, to alert the person whose job it was to handle this. This was not her responsibility. Her contract was with the man, not the child. Her role was in the boardroom, not the bedroom. She was a silent partner, a strategic asset. Her mind raced, cataloging all the reasons she should not move, all the boundaries she had mentally drawn. Another cry, this one sharper and laced with a pain that twisted something deep inside her, shattered her paralysis. Before she could reason herself out of it, she was on her feet, the laptop forgotten on the sofa. Her footsteps were silent on the thick runner of the stairs as she moved toward the sound, drawn by an instinct she thought had died long ago. She pushed open Lily's door to find the little girl curled into a tight ball, her small body trembling, her face pale and contorted in a grimace of pain. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. The sight of such raw suffering in someone so small and innocent was a physical blow, knocking the air from Olivia's lungs and rendering all her carefully constructed defenses meaningless. "It hurts," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. Her fearful eyes locked onto Olivia's. In that moment, the entire artifice of their arrangement fell away. There was no contract, no merger, no Marcus Vance. There was only a child in pain, and an adult who was there to witness it. The carefully segmented roles of CEO, business partner, and contractual wife evaporated into nothingness. Olivia's mind, usually a whirlwind of strategies and solutions, went completely, blessedly blank. All her power, all her wealth, was utterly useless against this simple, brutal reality of a child's suffering. She moved to the bed and sat on the edge, her own surprise at her actions a distant thought. A memory, deep and hazy, surfaced from the recesses of her childhood. A time when she herself had been small and scared, and her own mother had soothed her. Without thinking, without deciding, she began to hum. It was a simple, wordless lullaby, a forgotten melody that came back to her as if it had only been yesterday. As she hummed, she reached out a hesitant hand and began to gently smooth the damp hair back from Lily's forehead. Her touch was tentative at first, then grew steady and sure. Julian finished his call and walked back inside, a knot of tension in his shoulders. He heard the faint sound of humming from upstairs and paused in the hallway, his heart catching in his throat. He crept up the stairs and stood in the doorway of Lily's room, utterly frozen by the scene before him. Olivia, the formidable ice queen of tech, was perched on his niece's bed, humming a soft, sweet lullaby. He watched as the rigid lines of pain on Lily's face began to soften, as her trembling body grew still under Olivia's gentle, rhythmic touch. He was witnessing a miracle, a moment of impossible tenderness from a woman he thought was incapable of it. As Lily's breathing finally deepened into the peaceful rhythm of sleep, Olivia slowly, carefully withdrew her hand. She felt shaken, as if she had woken from a trance. A strange warmth, potent and terrifying, was spreading through her veins. When she looked up, her gaze met Julian's from across the room. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes, a mixture of awe, relief, and a profound, heart-stopping gratitude, was more powerful than any words could ever be. This single, instinctual act of kindness was a breach of their contract, an unplanned deviation that would change the very nature of their deal. In the morning, the light filtering into the kitchen felt different, softer. The heavy awkwardness that had defined their cohabitation had evaporated overnight, replaced by a fragile, unspoken awareness. Julian placed a cup of coffee on the table for Olivia, a simple gesture, yet it was imbued with a quiet gratitude that was as potent as a declaration. He didn't speak of what he had witnessed in Lily's room, but it was there in his eyes, a new respect, a new curiosity. Olivia felt strangely exposed under his gaze, as if he had seen past the fortress walls to the forgotten, overgrown garden hidden within her. She was unused to being truly seen. Her mind, however, rebelled against this newfound intimacy. The cynical voice of her past, honed to a razor's edge by Marcus's betrayal, whispered poison in her ear. It told her this was all a performance. Julian's gratitude, his kindness, the entire warm domestic scene, it was just an act, a clever manipulation to ensure she remained committed to the merger that was saving his company. He had found her weakness, a flicker of empathy for a sick child, and now he was exploiting it. She clung to this suspicion, using it as an anchor to keep from drifting into the dangerously unfamiliar waters of genuine emotion. But the memory of the previous night was a powerful counter-argument. The feeling of Lily's small, feverish body relaxing under her touch, the simple, pure weight of a child's trust. These were not things that could be faked. And the look in Julian's eyes had not been triumphant or calculating. It had been one of profound, soul-deep relief. For the first time since she had rebuilt her life from the ashes of her broken heart, Olivia was faced with a conflict that could not be solved on a spreadsheet. Her mind presented one set of facts, and her reawakening heart presented another. The resulting dissonance was a quiet, internal agony. This turmoil galvanized her into action, into a decision that would redefine the terms of their entire arrangement. If she couldn't trust her feelings, she would trust her power. She retreated to the study, locking the door not for a business call, but for a personal mission. She opened a highly encrypted communication line, placing a call to a world-renowned geneticist at a private research facility in Switzerland, a man whose work she had once dismissively funded as a tax write-off. Her voice was low and commanding, the voice of a woman accustomed to reshaping the world to her will, but this time it was driven by something other than profit. "You will redirect all of your lab's resources to finding a cure for aplastic anemia," she stated, not a hint of negotiation in her tone. "I am transferring $100 million to your research foundation as an initial investment. You will have whatever you need, equipment, personnel, access. My only conditions are that this funding remains completely anonymous, and that you work with a singular focus. Find a viable, accelerated treatment. Price is not an object. Failure, however, is not an option." This was an act completely separate from her contract with Julian. It was a secret she would keep, a personal investment in a child's future. While Olivia was secretly marshaling her vast resources to fight a war on a cellular level, their original enemy made his move. That afternoon, Julian took a phone call that bleached the color from his face. Olivia watched from the living room as his posture stiffened, his hand clenching the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. His responses were clipped and terse. "That's a lie, Marcus. You have no proof. Don't you dare bring her into this." The name Marcus was a venomous hiss. The external threat they had been bracing for had finally arrived, and it was as ugly and personal as she had feared. When he hung up, the silence in the house was heavy and suffocating. "He knows," Julian said, his voice strained. "Or he suspects. He's threatening to leak the details of our prenuptial agreement to the press. He's launching a smear campaign to paint the marriage as a sham, to invalidate the merger with the board before it's fully solidified." The corporate battle had become a personal vendetta. Marcus was not just trying to win, he was trying to destroy them, to ruin their reputations and tear apart the very foundation of the deal that was Lily's only hope. This fight was no longer just business. That night, sleep was an impossibility for either of them. They found themselves in the kitchen near midnight, the unlit room a shared space for their anxieties. For the first time, the walls between them completely crumbled. Julian, his face etched with worry, spoke of Marcus's insidious tactics, of his ability to twist truth into lies. In return, Olivia offered a small, guarded piece of her own story, a detail about how Marcus had charmed her own father to gain access to her family's connections, the first step in his long, calculated betrayal. It was a tiny offering of vulnerability, but it was more than she had shared with anyone in 10 years. In the shared darkness, a new and different connection was forged. It was not the fragile intimacy of the morning, but the grim solidarity of two soldiers preparing for a siege. They were allies, bound not just by a contract, but by a shared enemy and a fierce mutual desire to protect an innocent child. He looked at her across the small kitchen table, seeing not the intimidating CEO, but the woman who hummed lullabies and secretly waged wars for the people she cared about. "He won't win," Julian said, his voice a low vow. "We won't let him." She met his gaze, and for the first time, she did not look away. A silent pact was made. The game had changed. It was no longer about a hostile takeover or a marriage of convenience. It was a fight for their future, for Lily's life, and for the possibility of something real that was beginning to grow in the shadow of their contractual obligations. The path ahead was fraught with danger, with a vindictive enemy determined to expose their every secret. But for the first time, Olivia did not feel entirely alone in the battle. If this story touched you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Your support is what motivates us to keep bringing you romances that warm the heart. The attack, when it came, was as subtle and venomous as Marcus Vance himself. It wasn't a formal accusation, but a poison pen piece in a leading financial journal, published online at dawn. The headline was a masterpiece of insinuation. Aura's Titan Queen and Legacy's Fallen King. A merger made in heaven or a marriage of desperation. The article was a tapestry of anonymous sources and carefully worded questions, casting doubt on the timing of their wedding and hinting at a level of corporate desperation that bordered on fraud. It didn't explicitly call their marriage a sham, but it planted the seed of doubt for the entire world to see. The smear campaign had officially begun. The fallout was immediate and relentless. Olivia's phone began to vibrate with a fury she hadn't experienced since her last hostile takeover. Board members from both Aura Innovations and the newly acquired Legacy Dynamics were calling, their voices laced with panic. Investors sent frantic emails demanding clarification. With practiced ease, Olivia slipped back into the armor of the Ice Queen. Her voice was cold steel as she navigated the calls, dismissing the article as tabloid gossip, a pathetic attempt by their rivals to undermine the most powerful merger of the decade. But beneath the calm, a cold dread was spreading through her. Marcus was attacking their legitimacy, the very foundation of their alliance. That evening, they stood in the quiet living room, the glow of the offensive article on a tablet casting long shadows on the walls. "We have to fight back," Julian said, his jaw tight with anger. "We can't let him control the narrative." Olivia knew he was right. They couldn't win this war with press releases and denials. They had to show the world they were united, a formidable and unshakable force. The annual Tech Philanthropy Gala, the premier social event of their industry, was in 2 days. It was the perfect stage. They would have to perform their marriage for all to see, a prospect that made Olivia's intensely private nature recoil. The night of the gala, a nervous energy crackled in the air of the brownstone. Olivia stood before the mirror, in an elegant, severe black gown, a dress that was both a statement and a shield. She fumbled with the clasp of a diamond necklace, a family heirloom she hadn't worn in years. "Here, let me," Julian's voice said from behind her. He stepped close, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck as he secured the clasp. The unexpected touch was a spark of warmth on her cold skin. For a dizzying moment, they were not business partners or co-conspirators, but simply a man and a woman, standing intimately close in the quiet of a bedroom. Their arrival was a flashbulb frenzy. As they stepped onto the red carpet, Julian placed a firm, possessive hand on the small of her back. The gesture was meant for the cameras, a signal of proprietary affection, but it sent a jolt of electricity straight through Olivia. She played her part flawlessly, her smile polished, her hand resting on his arm as if it belonged there. They moved as one, a seamless portrait of a power couple, their every glance and touch choreographed for maximum effect. To the watching world, they were the embodiment of success and love, the ultimate power couple who had found both in each other. Inside, they were a whirlwind of practiced charm, navigating the sea of curious onlookers and barely veiled whispers. They spoke eloquently of their shared vision, of the philanthropic initiatives their new combined company would champion. In a quiet corner under the guise of the loud orchestra, Julian leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "You're surprisingly good at this," he murmured, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Is it the CEO in you, or have you just been hiding a talent for acting?" The question hung between them, a gentle probe into the blurring line between the performance and the reality that was beginning to form. And then she saw him, across the opulent ballroom, Holding court and basking in the attention was Marcus Vance. He caught her eye, a smug, predatory smile spreading across his handsome face. He made no move to approach them. He simply lifted his champagne flute in a silent, mocking toast, a clear and public acknowledgement that he was the puppeteer behind the scenes, the author of their current troubles. The gesture was a declaration of war, a promise of the ruin he intended to bring down upon them. A chill ran down Olivia's spine, a cold fury mixing with the ghost of an old, familiar fear. The drive back to the brownstone was thick with a tense, exhausted silence. The adrenaline of the performance had faded, leaving behind the grim reality of their situation. They had won the evening's battle, successfully projecting an image of unity and strength, but the war was far from over. Marcus's public taunt had been a reminder that he would not rest until he had dismantled everything they were trying to build, not just their company, but the fragile sanctuary they had inadvertently created within the walls of their contract. The small victory felt hollow, a temporary reprieve before the next inevitable assault. They were met at the door by the worried face of Lily's evening nurse. "Her fever has spiked," she said, her voice low and urgent. "She's been asking for both of you." In an instant, the glittering world of Gala's stock prices and corporate warfare dissolved. All that mattered was the small, fragile girl upstairs. They rushed to her room, their earlier performance for the public replaced by a genuine and desperate unity. They were no longer acting as concerned parents. They simply were. The sight of Lily, pale and struggling for breath, was a brutal reminder of the true stakes of their fight. Standing beside Julian, her hand instinctively finding his as they looked down at the sleeping child, the full weight of her new reality crashed down upon Olivia. Marcus wasn't just attacking a merger. He was attacking the stability that this child desperately needed to survive. Every lie he published, every doubt he sowed, was a direct threat to Lily's life. The fight was no longer about avenging her own past or securing her empire. A fierce, primal, and utterly unfamiliar wave of protective fury surged through her. She would not let him harm this child. She would burn his entire world to the ground first. The night was a long, silent vigil, a shared prayer in the dim glow of a nightlight. The world outside, with its flashing cameras and venomous headlines, ceased to exist. Their universe shrank to the four walls of Lily's bedroom, to the rhythmic beep of a pulse oximeter and the soft whisper of a humidifier. They worked together in a seamless, unspoken rhythm, a team forged in the crucible of crisis. Olivia would fetch a cool cloth, and Julian would already be there to take it, his hands gentle as he bathed Lily's forehead. There were no roles, no titles, just two people united in a single, desperate purpose. In the quiet moments, as Lily slept fitfully, Olivia found herself watching Julian. She saw the deep lines of exhaustion carved around his eyes, the weary slump of his shoulders, but she also saw a strength that was utterly foreign to her own world of corporate power plays. It was not the strength of aggression or dominance, but a quiet, unyielding power that came from pure devotion. He would murmur reassurances to Lily even in her sleep, his love a tangible presence in the room, a shield against the darkness. A dangerous, unfamiliar ache bloomed in Olivia's chest, part admiration, part affection, all terrifying. As the first pale fingers of dawn crept through the window, the truth finally cornered her, leaving no room for denial. She was falling in love. The realization was not a gentle, romantic unfolding, but a seismic shock that threatened to bring her entire world crashing down. She loved the fierce protectiveness in Julian's eyes. She loved the indomitable spirit of the small, sleeping girl in the bed. This emotion, this terrifying vulnerability, was the very thing she had structured her life to avoid. It was a catastrophic system failure in the fortress of her heart, a breach in the one wall she had sworn would never be broken again. Her mind, a loyal and cruel guard, immediately flashed images of Marcus. It replayed his charming lies, his calculated affection. The devastating moment she realized his love had been nothing but a strategy to gain power. It screamed at her that Julian was no different. He needed a wife to save his company. He needed a maternal figure to satisfy a hospital board. Was his kindness, his gratitude, just a more masterful manipulation? The battle raged within her, the bitter lessons of her past warring against the undeniable truth of the present moment. Her cynicism was her shield, but it was beginning to feel impossibly heavy. Just as the sun began to properly rise, Lily's fever broke. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief filled the room. Julian looked across the bed at Olivia, his face a mess of exhaustion and raw, unguarded emotion. "I don't know how I would have gotten through that without you," he said, his voice thick and hoarse. He reached across the bed, his hand covering hers for a brief, startling moment. It wasn't a gesture for the cameras or a move in a negotiation. It was a simple, impulsive act of human connection, of shared relief and gratitude, and it felt more real to Olivia than any promise Marcus had ever made. The warmth of his touch was still tingling on her skin when she finally left the room and checked her phone. The reprieve was brutally short-lived. A new headline, this time from a notorious corporate gossip blog known for its vicious accuracy, screamed from her screen. A key clause from their prenuptial agreement had been leaked. It detailed the 5-year termination option, complete with the cold 7-figure financial settlement Olivia would receive upon the dissolution of their partnership. It was a surgical strike, painting her as a mercenary and their marriage as the soulless transaction she had once believed it to be. The carefully constructed narrative they had presented at the gala was instantly annihilated. The leak was designed to inflict maximum damage, stripping away all emotional context and leaving only the cold, hard print of a business deal. It validated every whispered rumor, every cynical theory. It was Marcus's checkmate, a move designed to turn her own board against her, to make her look like a fool who had mixed personal sentiment with corporate strategy, or worse, a predator who had taken advantage of a desperate man. The public image she had meticulously crafted for over a decade was in flames. The call came less than an hour later from her lead counsel, his voice grim. "The board is in an absolute uproar, Olivia. They feel you've exposed the company to unacceptable risk and public ridicule. Marcus Vance is formally petitioning for an emergency meeting of the new board. He's going to cite this leak as proof of misrepresentation and call for a vote to dissolve the merger and remove you as CEO." The end game was here. Marcus wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to erase her, to strip her of the empire that had been her only refuge. Olivia ended the call, the sterile silence of the study pressing in on her. She looked out the window at the city she owned, at the life she had built on a foundation of mistrust and control. That foundation was now cracking beneath her feet. She could hear the faint sound of Julian and Lily talking in the kitchen, a murmur of life and warmth that beckoned to her. Everything she was beginning to truly want, everything she was terrified to admit she loved, was about to be obliterated by the man she had once made the mistake of loving. She was trapped between two impossible choices. Her mind, the ruthless strategist, urged her to cut her losses, to invoke the very contract Marcus had leaked, and retreat to the safety of her solitary empire. But her heart, a traitorous and newly awakened thing, screamed at her to stay, to fight for the man and the child who had breached her defenses and shown her a life she never thought she deserved. For the first time, protecting her empire and protecting her heart were mutually exclusive. She had to choose, and either path felt like a betrayal of a part of herself. Julian found her in the study, standing before the large window, a solitary figure against the sprawling city. He expected to see the Ice Queen, defeated and retreating, or perhaps the strategist calculating her exit. He found neither. When she turned to face him, her eyes were not cold, but blazing with a resolute fire he had never seen before. There were no tears, no trace of fear. "He thinks he's won," she said, her voice a low, steady hum of controlled fury. "He thinks because he broke my heart once, he can break my spirit now. He's wrong." In that moment, Julian knew. She wasn't running. She was fighting. "My legal team has a strategy," he began, pulling out a folder, his voice filled with a renewed sense of hope. "We can argue that the prenuptial agreement is standard practice for high-net-worth individuals, a prudent financial measure." Olivia held up a hand, stopping him. "No, Julian," she said softly but firmly. "You can't fight a fire like this with legal statutes and financial reports. He didn't attack our business plan. He attacked our integrity. He attacked our family." She looked at him, and he understood. A logical defense was a shield, but it could not win this battle. To win, they needed a sword. The day before the meeting passed in a strange, surreal calm. While Julian and his lawyers fine-tuned their rational, data-driven defense, Olivia disconnected. She spent the afternoon in the garden with Lily, who was finally feeling strong enough to be outside. The little girl sat in the grass, painstakingly weaving a bracelet from colorful embroidery thread. When she was finished, She tied it around Olivia's wrist. "This is for good luck," Lily said, her smile radiant. Olivia looked at the simple, childish trinket. It felt heavier, more real, and infinitely more valuable than all the diamonds in her vault. It was a talisman, a physical reminder of the true empire she was fighting to protect. The morning of the meeting, they stood in the entryway of the brownstone, dressed in their corporate armor. The silence between them was not awkward, but filled with a profound, unspoken understanding. Just before they left, Julian turned to her, his expression serious, his eyes searching hers. "Whatever happens in that room today, Olivia," he said, his voice earnest and low, "I want you to know that what you have done for Lily, and for me, it's the most real thing in my life. Thank you." He wasn't thanking the CEO who had saved his company. He was thanking the woman who had hummed a lullaby in the dark. His words were the final piece of armor she needed. They walked into the boardroom on the 80th floor, the place where their strange journey had begun. It was just as cold, just as imposing, but this time, Olivia did not feel alone. Julian was a steadfast, solid presence by her side. The long mahogany table was lined with the faces of the board members, a jury of their peers. Their expressions ranged from the coldly neutral to the openly hostile. She could feel their judgment, a palpable force in the room. This was her kingdom, her fortress, and it had been turned into a courtroom where she was the one on trial. Marcus Vance took the floor, and the performance began. He was charismatic, charming, his voice resonating with false sincerity. He spoke of fiduciary duty, of transparency, of the sacred trust between a board and its CEO. And then he brought up the image of the leaked prenup clause on the screen behind him, the cold, black and white text magnified for all to see. "This, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice dripping with theatrical pity, "is not the foundation of a marriage. It is the exit clause of a corporate contract. Is this the kind of leadership we want for this company?" He wove a masterful narrative of deceit. He painted Olivia as a cold-hearted opportunist, a predator who had taken advantage of a desperate man. He portrayed Julian as a pathetic, failed leader, willing to enter a fraudulent marriage and endanger his company's reputation just to save his own skin. He twisted their actions, their motives, their entire arrangement into something sordid and ugly, a conspiracy of greed. Olivia remained perfectly still, her face a serene, unreadable mask, letting him speak, letting his poison seep into every corner of the silent, watchful room. When he finally finished, the silence was damning. The board avoided their eyes. The verdict had been rendered. As planned, Julian stood up to present their defense. His voice was calm, steady, and rational, a stark contrast to Marcus's emotional theatrics. He spoke of the undeniable financial logic of the merger, of market synergy and shareholder value. He pointed to rising stock prices and positive industry forecasts. He was a bastion of reason, attempting to build a logical dam against the emotional flood Marcus had unleashed upon the room. But it wasn't working. Olivia could see it in the board's closed-off expressions. Julian was speaking to their heads, but Marcus had already captured their hearts and minds with a more compelling, albeit fictional story. They were listening to data, but they had already been convinced of a lie. She looked down at the colorful, childish bracelet on her wrist, a stark splash of life and warmth against her severe business suit. She knew, with absolute certainty, that no financial chart could save them now. Only the truth could. As Julian paused to take a sip of water, Olivia gently placed her hand on his forearm, a silent signal for him to stop. He looked at her, surprised. She slowly, deliberately rose to her feet. An unnerving calm had settled over her, a strange and powerful serenity. The eyes of every person in the room swiveled to her. She did not look at the damning prenup on the screen or the hostile faces of the board. Her gaze first found Julian, a silent apology and a promise, and then settled directly, unflinchingly, on Marcus Vance. The room was utterly silent. Her war was about to begin. Olivia's voice when she spoke was not the commanding tone of a CEO, but something quieter, softer, and far more powerful. It cut through the tension in the room, capturing every ounce of attention. "Mr. Vance is correct," she began, her gaze unwavering as it remained locked on her ex-fiancé, ignoring the shocked faces of the board. "He has presented you with a series of facts, and those facts are, for the most part, true. Our marriage did begin as a contract, a strategic alliance born of desperation and a mutual need to protect our companies from a common predator. The admission hung in the air, a stunning, disarming confession. From her leather portfolio, she slowly withdrew a document, her signed copy of the infamous prenuptial agreement. She held it up, the crisp paper a symbol of the cold, calculated bargain she had made, the legal embodiment of the fortress around her heart. "This was my shield," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "This was the foundation of my world, a world built on the belief that love is a transaction, that trust is a liability, and that vulnerability is a fatal flaw. A world that you, Marcus, taught me to build." The personal accusation was a quiet, devastating blow. Then, with a deliberation that was utterly riveting, she brought her hands together and tore the thick document cleanly in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed in the tomb-like silence of the boardroom. She tore the halves into quarters, letting the pieces flutter from her fingers onto the gleaming mahogany table. "This contract is null and void," she declared, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity. "Because the person who signed it no longer exists. She was a ghost, living in a fortress of wealth and solitude, and she was miserable. I am not her anymore." With tears now shining in her eyes, she finally turned away from Marcus and looked at Julian. "This man and his incredible niece," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she no longer tried to hide. "They walked into my life with their chaos and their kindness, and they showed me how wrong I was. They taught me that true strength isn't about being untouchable. It's about having the courage to feel. They taught me that a home is more than glass and steel. They taught me how to love again, not with a contract, but with a whole and terrified heart." Her gaze swept across the stunned faces of the board. "And because of that, I am announcing today the formation of a new entity, one that is entirely separate from this company. I am liquidating a significant portion of my personal fortune to create the Lily Thompson Medical Foundation, a multi-billion-dollar endowment dedicated to funding research and providing care for children battling rare diseases. This will be my life's work, my legacy, regardless of any vote you take today. This is my new empire." Her vulnerability had transformed into an unassailable power. The gesture was so profound, so undeniably genuine, it left the room breathless. Julian, his face a mask of awe and overwhelming love, walked from his place at the table to stand beside her. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, a silent, powerful display of unity in front of the very people trying to tear them apart. He looked at the board, then at Olivia. "This may have started as a deal for the world," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but it became a vow in my heart. I love my wife, and no vote you take in this room will ever change that." He leaned in and kissed her, sealing their true union, not with a contract, but with an act of love. The spell was broken. A murmur went through the room, a wave of shifting allegiances and dawning respect. The chairman called for the vote. The result was a landslide. The merger was unanimously upheld. A second vote was called, a vote of no confidence in Marcus Vance, citing his malicious and destabilizing actions. He was stripped of his board seat, his plot to ruin them utterly decimated, not by a superior business strategy, but by a truth he could never comprehend. He sat in stunned silence, a king dethroned in a kingdom of his own making. In the months that followed, their real life began. The Lilly Foundation's resources secured a place for Lily in a revolutionary new gene therapy trial, and she began a recovery that doctors called miraculous. In the sun-drenched garden of the brownstone, Olivia and Julian renewed their vows. There were no cameras, no board members, just the two of them and a healthy, laughing Lily acting as their maid of honor, tossing rose petals at their feet. True to her word, Olivia transformed the culture of her company, championing family-friendly policies and becoming a global leader in corporate philanthropy. 3 years later, a vibrant, thriving teenage Lily stood proudly between Olivia and Julian at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Lily Thompson Wing for Pediatric Research. Olivia's smile was no longer a guarded, calculated expression. It was a beacon of genuine warmth and contentment that reached her eyes. She was not the ice queen of tech, but a woman remade by love, a leader whose power was now rooted in compassion. She had found a wealth far greater than any stock price, an empire built not of glass, but of family. As the ceremony wound down, a young, anxious-looking CEO approached her, her story a haunting echo of Olivia's past. A struggling company, a sick child, a world of desperation. Olivia looked at the woman and saw herself. She placed a gentle, reassuring hand on her arm, her smile full of empathy and understanding. "You're not alone," Olivia said, her voice a soft promise. "The foundation is here to help. We will help you." Her journey had come full circle, her broken heart now a source of healing for others, her redemption complete and absolute. If you liked this video, please subscribe and leave a like. And if you watched until the very end, let us know by commenting with the keyword True Empire so we know you made it. Thank you for being part of our story.